You may think you know everything about Jamie Foxx, the charisma, the talent, the versatility. But what if I told you that behind all the bright lights, behind every laugh, and behind every perfectly delivered performance, there is a slow, quiet, almost invisible tragedy unfolding? A tragedy not marked by explosions, scandals, or headlines, but by something far more subtle. Something that creeps in, unnoticed, until one day it becomes impossible to ignore. And at 57 years old, this tragedy is not loud, dramatic, or sensational. It's quiet, it's slow, and it's heartbreakingly human. Today we're going to talk about that tragedy, not in a flashy or emotional way, but in the plainest, most ordinary tone possible. Almost boring, because sometimes the deepest heartbreak is found not in chaos, but in silence. At this stage in his life, Jamie Foxx, born in Eric Marlin Bishop, stands as one of the most versatile performers of his generation. Actor, comedian, singer, producer, pianist, the list goes on with no sign of stopping. And yet, when someone reaches 57, especially someone who has lived their life constantly in front of the world, the public often forgets that even the brightest stars carry shadows behind them, shadows that stretch far longer and grow far heavier with time. This is not a story filled with sensational twists or shocking revelations. Instead, it is the kind of story that moves slowly, like an old documentary, with too many pauses, too many faded photographs, and too much narration that lingers a little longer than you might want it to. But sometimes the truth of a life, especially the quieter parts, deserves that kind of slow, almost tired pacing. Jamie Foxx's journey began long before the fame, long before the awards, and long before the world learned to call him one of the most talented entertainers alive. Raised by his grandparents, he found himself in an environment that demanded discipline, structure, and a constant push toward excellence. The tragedy here doesn't lie in the hardships themselves, because those hardships shaped him. The tragedy lies in how the world tends to overlook just how much cost is hidden inside someone's success story. As Jamie grew older, the expectations grew heavier. Not because he wasn't capable, far from it, but because people started assuming that no matter how high the bar was raised, he would always find a way to jump over it. That kind of expectation is not loud or thrilling. It's quiet, persistent, and honestly incredibly exhausting. And that exhaustion doesn't create headlines or viral moments. It creates something far more subtle. A slow draining of emotional and physical energy that takes hold over years, even decades. At 57, Foxx finds himself in a position where the world still expects the same spark, the same speed, and the same unlimited output he delivered in his 20s and 30s. But the truth, the boring and unglamorous truth, is that no one can outrun time. Even someone as gifted as Jamie Foxx eventually feels the weight of years pressing in. There is a tragedy in watching the world forget that its brightest stars are human beings. People who age, people who get tired, people who carry fears and regrets and moments of doubt. And the tragic part is not that people expect too much, but that the person expected to deliver begins to believe he must live up to those expectations no matter what. Jamie Foxx has always been known for his ability to shift effortlessly between personas. One moment, he's the comedian, bringing laughter to millions. The next, he's delivering an Oscar-winning performance that leaves audiences speechless. Then he becomes the smooth R&B vocalist, the dramatic storyteller, the action hero, the mentor, the host, the collaborator, and the list never seems to stop. But the very gift that made him iconic also created an invisible burden, the demand to constantly be everything. And as he stands at 57, the heartbreaking tragedy isn't some single catastrophic event. It's the slow realization that the world rarely allows its icons to simply exist, to slow down, or to step away gracefully. The more he achieved, the more people wanted, and the more they wanted, the less room there was for him to simply breathe. Behind closed doors, the life of an entertainer, especially one who has spent so many years balancing multiple careers at once, becomes increasingly complicated.
fatigue sets in. Not just physical fatigue, but emotional and creative fatigue. A quiet heaviness that doesn't announce itself dramatically. It just appears one day, and then another day, until it becomes a routine presence. And the world rarely sees this, not because Jamie hides it, but because he has spent his entire career learning how to perform through everything. Pressure, stress, uncertainty. The tragedy here is almost painfully ordinary. The simple human truth that nobody, not even the most talented among us, can be everything forever. When you reach 57, the dreams you once chased with boundless energy begin to feel different. Not necessarily smaller, but heavier. You begin to realize how much they cost you along the way. The missed moments, the mental toll, the personal sacrifices. Jamie Foxx, whose life has been defined by relentless movement, now stands at an age where many people begin to reflect on everything they ran past without noticing. And that reflection, that slow, quiet reflection, is its own kind of tragedy. Not loud, not dramatic, just quietly heartbreaking. Because for the first time, perhaps he can look back and see the weight of what it took to be Jamie Foxx. Not the public figure, not the performer, but the man behind all of it. And as he stands at this chapter of life, the tragedy is simply this: the realization that the world will always remember the performances, but may never fully understand the price he paid to deliver them.
As we continue exploring this quiet and often overlooked tragedy, we need to understand something about Jamie Foxx that many people never stop to think about: the pressure of being endlessly relevant. It is one thing to chase dreams when the world doesn't yet know your name. It is another thing entirely to maintain a level of excellence when millions of people have come to expect it automatically. And at 57, that expectation does not magically fade away. If anything, it gets heavier. There is a strange, almost invisible sadness that clings to long careers in entertainment. People imagine that success builds a protective shield, that fame, wealth, and recognition make things easier. But the reality, especially for someone as multifaceted as Jamie Foxx, is quite the opposite. The more you accomplish, the more you are expected to maintain, and the more exhausting it becomes to keep reinventing yourself. This is the part of the tragedy that doesn't show up in interviews or award ceremonies. It's not dramatic enough to trend on social media. Instead, it unfolds slowly, in the background, through quiet moments when the cameras are off and the world is no longer demanding anything. Yet the pressure remains anyway, lingering like an echo that never fully fades. Foxx built a career on versatility, but versatility comes with its own lonely reality. When you become known as the person who can do everything, people stop wondering if you actually feel like doing anything at all. They assume you always have the energy. They assume you always have the passion. They assume you always have the ability to switch from one lane to another without missing a beat. And at 57, that assumption is its own persistent weight, a weight that grows heavier with time. Imagine the emotional fatigue of constantly meeting expectations that never decrease. Acting roles require discipline and emotional commitment. Music demands vulnerability and creativity. Comedy requires energy and timing. Hosting requires charm and attentiveness. And being a public figure requires stamina, the kind of stamina most people never have to think about in their daily lives. But the tragedy here is not that Jamie Foxx is incapable. It is that the world rarely stops to consider how demanding it is to sustain a legacy built on constant excellence. Even when no one says it aloud, the expectation lingers. Jamie Foxx must always deliver. This isn't loud heartbreak. It's the soft kind. The kind that makes a person sit longer in silence, maybe staring at nothing in particular, reflecting on how much life has passed without ever slowing down. When you spend decades pushing forward, the moment you finally pause can feel strangely empty. At 57, Foxx is in a phase of life where reflection becomes unavoidable. And reflection, while meaningful, can be heavy in a way that is not dramatic, but simply tiring. He has lived through eras of entertainment, shifts in industry values, waves of criticism, and cycles of praise.
He has reinvented himself time and time again, each reinvention requiring emotional energy that most people never realize is being spent. And now, as he looks at the arc of his life and career, he may see not just the victories, but also the small, quiet sacrifices made along the way. Sacrifices like missed personal time, the pressure to stay relevant, the emotional toll of public perception, and the constant shaping of identity to fit the demands of the moment.
The tragedy is not in a single event, but in the accumulation of these small, unseen burdens. Fame is often romanticized, but behind the scenes, it is organizational, repetitive, and sometimes painfully monotonous. Long rehearsals, endless travel, early mornings and late nights, interviews, scripts, meetings, studio sessions, public obligations, private expectations. It all blends together into a routine that from the outside looks glamorous. But from the inside, it often feels like a cycle that never quite ends. Even for someone with extraordinary giftedness, the years wear down the rhythm. And at 57, Jamie Foxx stands in the middle of a long journey, surrounded by memories of accomplishments, but also aware of the sheer effort it took to sustain them. Another part of the tragedy is how the entertainment industry treats longevity. In youth, the world celebrates you. In maturity, the world challenges you. And as you age, the world quietly shifts its attention elsewhere. This shift is not cruel or intentional. It is simply the nature of a fast-paced industry. But for someone who has spent decades being a center of attention, the slow fading of spotlight can feel strangely disorienting. Not painful, not dramatic, just quietly sad. Because once the noise dies down, you're left alone with your thoughts, realizing how much of your life was spent performing for others. And at 57, Fox is at a point where those thoughts become more frequent, more reflective, and sometimes more sorrowful than he may have expected. There's also the tragedy of legacy, not the glamorous version, but the heavy responsibility of it. Legacy is not just what you leave behind for others to remember. It is also the burden of maintaining the image the world thinks it knows. Jamie Foxx faces a unique pressure, the expectation to always be the charismatic, talented, endlessly capable figure the world has seen for decades. But nobody can maintain that image forever, and accepting that truth can be quietly heartbreaking. It's not a breakdown, it's not a crisis, it's simply a soft, tired acknowledgement of time. In the quiet hours, away from stages, cameras, and crowds, Jamie Foxx might find himself reflecting on what comes next. Does he slow down? Does he shift directions? Does he focus on things outside of entertainment? These are questions many people face at 57, but for someone whose entire identity has been shaped through constant activity, the stillness itself can feel like a tragedy. Not the kind people write headlines about, but the kind people feel deep inside when the world finally stops long enough for them to hear their own thoughts clearly. And as we look at this stage of his life, the tragedy is not anything explosive or sensational. It is simply the emotional truth of a person who has given so much of himself to the world that he may now have to figure out how to keep enough of himself for himself. A slow tragedy, a quiet tragedy, a human tragedy.